Hey everyone, welcome back. We're going to go ahead and now do part 2 of the 6L80E demonstration rebuild series. So we're going to basically put everything back into the case. All the sub-assemblies have been put together. So we're going to do a couple of things first, including air check the 3.5R drum and the 4.56 drum. Make sure everything is applying as it should. So we'll show you how to do that. And then point out a couple of things about the pump itself, specifically the stator and pump cover assemblies and design change that occurred in 2009 that you'll need to know about. I did not mention that in the first part of the video for whatever reason. I just slipped my mind, so I want to make sure I cover it in this part so that you have the information if you don't already know. Alright, so as you can see, you have two different stator pump cover assemblies on the bench. The one that's bolted to the pump body / bell, and then this one here. So if you look closely, these two stators around in the sealing ring area are not the same. In mid-2009, they changed the design of the sealing rings and the sealing ring grooves to accept what we call support O-rings underneath the sealing rings, and then they also machined in two cutouts or lugs for locking tabs. What this design change did was force the sealing rings out against the sealing surfaces here in the bore of the 3.5R drum to promote better sealing integrity. Prior to this, in the earlier units using the first design stator, there was complaints and pattern issues, or instances rather, where 3.5R and 1, 2, 3, 4 clutch burnup would occur because the sealing rings were not adequately sealing, and that is again with the first design. So let's see if I could zoom in a little bit. Alright, so we have the first design stator, and as you can see, take the sealing ring off. Underneath there's nothing. I mean, it's just the sealing ring groove and that's it. Okay, and there have been some accounts as relayed by other builders, mostly builders that I've seen online in forums, whose information that they share I'll pay attention to because they're well established in the industry. They probably have decades of experience building transmissions in general, and GM units in particular, and have likely forgotten more than I'll ever know about transmissions in general. And these folks who I follow have relayed accounts where even the brand new sealing rings that come in the kits, particularly the aftermarket kits, will not adequately seal when using this design. Alright, so if you compare that to the second design stator, okay, I'm going to go ahead and remove a sealing ring, and underneath you can see that there is a support O-ring. So again, that O-ring forces the sealing ring itself against the drum more positively to create a better seal between the stator and the 3.5R drum, and that has significantly reduced the failure rates for both the 3.5R clutch and the 1, 2, 3, 4 clutch, and between that and some of the changes to the design of the 1, 2, 3, 4 piston and the 3.5R drum itself, where, as you can see, the earlier drums had these horrible welds. Later drums that was improved upon, that reduced the premature failure rate of these transmissions fairly significantly relative to the earlier units. So if you have like a 2006 late through, I'd say, early 2009, 2010 vintage 6L80 or vehicle with a 6L80 in it, and you go to overhaul, you'll want to pay close attention to, among other things, the stator design. If you have an early design stator like this, then you'll want to retro, you want to retro back a late second design stator pump cover assembly onto your bell after you do all the machine work, like I mean, as you can see, this thing's scored up to high heaven. It would need to be resurfaced, but this pump cover here is identical to this pump cover. Nothing has changed in terms of the valving, the hydraulic circuitry, the design, etc., bolt panel. Everything is identical, exactly the same. So the only thing that's different is the stator shaft itself. So you'll want to replace the stator pump cover assembly with a late model if you have this early design stator. So I know, like I said, I didn't touch on that at all. At least I don't believe I did in part 1 of this rebuild series, so I want to make sure I adequately cover it here in part 2 before we go any further. Alright, next thing I want to do is air check the 3.5R drum and the 4.5.6 clutch. So we got the 1, 2, 3, 4 clutch, the 3.5R clutch, and the 4.5.6 clutch. I'm going to check it on the pump assembly just to validate that everything is applying as it should, and you know, if there is any problems, we can dig in and see what those problems are and fix them. Alright, let me set that up and then we'll resume. For your 4.5.6, just remove your planet and your sun gear, and then just carefully lower the drum into the shaft, or into the bore rather. Okay, you don't need the planet installed to do your air checks. Alright, let me zoom in so you can see the clutch feed ports is marked. So we got the 4.5.6 here, 3.5R, and 1, 2, 3, 4. Alright, so what I'll do is I'll go ahead and reposition the camera so you can see the clutches apply as I introduce air into each of these feed ports, and you can see what that's like. Now incidentally, if you suspect you have a cross leak, maybe you're slipping a little bit or delayed engagement, between, first, second, third, and fifth gear, I should say first, second, third, fourth, and fifth gear, and you've taken the valve body off, overhauled that, and it still persists. What you can do is, and you should do this if you take the valve body off regardless, actually, is check if whether or not you do have a cross leak because of worn sealing rings. These two feed ports here as well as this one. If you see air coming out of here or fluid coming out of here when you're checking this, then that tells me that you would have a cross leak between the clutch circuits due to worn sealing rings on the stator. Likewise, if 4.5.6, the apply should be really firm. I mean, you should hear it like a firm whoop and then release. If you hear air coming out of this circuit, or you just hear air in general, then that would tell me that you have worn sealing rings on the turbine or input shaft. Alright, I'm going to do the 4.5.6 clutch first, and then I'll get this drum out of the way so that we could do the others. So 4.5.6. See that positive apply? And then release. Okay. So if we were to install this particular transmission and just thinking about the 4.5.6 clutch, this clutch would work without any issues whatsoever, as is. Alright, drop our planet back in, make sure it's orientated correctly. You want this side up. Otherwise, these splines, if they're facing down, we'll never be able to engage the splines here on the 3.5R drum. That's these splines right here, not these splines. This is the stator. So these are the splines for the 3.5R clutch drum. These are the stator splines. And when that happens, you have no movement no matter where you put the column shifter. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, good apply, good release. And 3-5R. All right, so again, we have good apply. Tells me that all things equal, this clutch is healthy. The sealing rings appear to be healthy, both on the stator as well as the turbine shaft. But again, given that this is a first design stator, we would retro a second design on to this pump body slash bell housing. All right, let me again reset up the camera, reposition it so that you can see everything go into the case. We'll start with the output shaft slash planetary carrier assembly, and then work our way from there. Okay, first thing we want to do is lubricate the rear seal and bushing. So again, if this was a for real build, we would replace both of those things. But since this is not, we're not going to touch them. So just lube it up. And next, what you're going to need to do is put your rear case bearing into position. Going to go like this with the rotating side inward, and then the support side facing down or rearward. Alright, next you're going to need to grab your installation tool for your planetary assembly or slash output shaft. So there are special tools that are available, both from Kent Moore / OTC, whatever the dealership tool is, as well as Adaptacase and a few others. If you look on eBay, you'll see them there. I'm just using a threaded rod along with some washers and nuts. And I showed you the particulars for this, kind of improvised tool during the last section of part 1. Allow you to easily and safely lower the gear train into the case. And let me reposition the camera so that you can get a little bit better view of what's going on. Alright, so there's the gear train. Next, just lube up the inner portion of the case where the center support is going to go, including those lugs. And pay close attention to the feed ports there at the 6 o'clock position on the case, because you want to align the same feed ports that are on the center support so that they all line up. I mean, common sense, right? So I'm lubing up the center support also. This is kind of somewhat of a snug fit. It's a glove-like, if you will. All right, so I'm going to do the best I can to kind of lower this into the case, so that, again, you can see exactly what's happening. So on the support itself, you're going to have your 4 feed ports here. They have to be aligned with the same feed ports on the case. there it goes. So I can put a light in here so you can see a little bit better. All right, so you have the snap ring grooved exposed. And what you want is you want the snap ring groove to be at clocked so that the ends are at roughly the 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock position. All right, that's how it came out. That's how you want it to go back in. This wide portion here has to be aligned with the little cutout in the case so that it fits pretty much perfectly. All right, so this thing is really beefy. So you saw earlier the large orange snap ring pliers on the bench. That's pretty much what you're going to have to use to install this snap ring safely. And there's a flat side and a beveled side. Okay, the beveled side faces up, or faces forward. So if you don't have a pair of these snap ring pliers, to my knowledge, and believe me, I've tried, there's not really any improvised way that you could do this safely and effectively in terms of taking the snap ring out and putting it back in. You really need these pliers. So these are made by a company called PRTC. They're out of Salt Lake City. I purchased these on eBay. As far as the pliers available, you have the dealership pliers. I'll put the J tool, you know, I'll annotate the video with it. And then there are several others that are out there of varying like quality, if you will. There's one set that I want to say is like 90 bucks that I've seen, and I was thinking about buying that when I bought these, but the ones I bought, in my opinion, are a lot sturdier. The other ones looked a little flimsy, and you know, with this snap ring being the way it is, you really don't want to be messing around with something that's real flimsy like that. So now with the back half of the casing, we're going to go ahead and start installing our hubs, our drums, and then finish up with the pump. Okay, so we'll start with the 3.5R hub. Okay, make sure all your bearings are still in position where they need to be. Then your 1, 2, 3, 4 hub. And then your 4, 5, 6 hub. Make sure that this little bearing, the tabs or tangs, if you will, are facing you. Okay, each time you install a hub, just spin it. Make sure that, you know, everything spins nice and smooth. Nothing feels weird. You know, no kind of galling or, excuse me, galling or grinding or, you know, anything else that otherwise doesn't feel right. Okay, now go ahead and install your 456/ input shaft front planet assembly. And you'll have to, you know, mess around with this until it's fully on, fully seated. You know, just spin it while you're jerking it around a little bit until you're confident it's 100% in there. Alright, next is going to be your 35R drum. Now, you can install that drum without the special tool. It involves kind of canting the, canting the whole case kind of at an angle, and then just carefully lowering it in until it more or less sits on top of everything else in there, and then, you know, you're going to shimmy it back and forth, you know, just using your hands until it splines 100% all the way on. It just takes longer to do that, but you can do it. But if you build a lot of these, you're going to want the, you know, the lifting tool. Because there's going to be a lot of dancing around that you're going to have to do with this thing. And what you want to do is you want to keep an eye on the bore and see where it is relative to your sun gear. And yes, there's not a lot of room to work in here, so you know, you may get caught up like I just did. Okay. I mean, I maybe went a little bit overboard there with the shaking and the shimmying, but you get the idea. Again, same deal. Rotate everything. Make sure nothing feels weird. Because if it feels weird, obviously, you want to stop and figure out what's going on. Okay, now we're ready to install the pump assembly, you know, onto the rest of the case. So a couple things first. One, the splines on the base of the stator. Okay, these splines here have to mesh with the female splines on the front sun gear. So when you drop it in, it's probably not going to go all the way in. They're probably not going to line up perfectly. I mean, if they do, great, but you know, just be prepared to kind of shimmy the assembly here, and you can turn the output shaft, or you can, you know, turn the input shaft, whatever you got to do to line up those splines. You also have to line up the alignment dowel here with the corresponding location on the bell housing. So just two things to keep in mind before you install the pump. Third thing I'll cover, I know I said a couple, but I guess there's a few. Third thing is this pump thrust washer here on the base of the stator. This washer is not selective. In other words, unlike a 4L60 or a 4L80E, you can't go to GM or your transmission part supplier and get different thicknesses of washer to adjust your end play. There's just one thickness. When you machine the two halves of the pump assembly, you're effectively shrinking the height of that pump assembly, you know, as measured vertically, by 20 thousandths of an inch. Standard practice is to take 10 thousand off of the face of the working surface on the body and 10 thousandths off of the face of the pump cover. So obviously you have to make that up somehow. And the way that you do that is to purchase Sonic's 20 thousandths thicker pump washer, so that you can preserve that relationship between the travel on the front of the drum and the pump washer. There are other shims you can buy too. and those can further and more granularly adjust end play so that you can dial it into exactly where you want it. On these transmissions, I like to see between 6 and 12 thousandths, 6 and 15 thousandths as like a high end. But you want to keep the case relatively tight on, just like most GM transmissions, the 4L80s, the 4L60s, 700s, TH350s. I mean, they're all the same in that respect, so just be aware of that. All right, we'll go ahead and lube up our surfaces, and then we'll lube up the O-ring. And again, we're reusing the old O-ring. Something you'd never ever do, but this is just for demo only, demonstration. It's not for real. Okay. I'm not gonna lie to you. I installed this before I filmed this segment, so that it didn't take forever to get it lined up. But, you know, cheating just for the sake of the video. So these bolts get 53 foot-pounds, and you just want to torque them in like a crisscross pattern. I mean, you could start wherever you want, it doesn't matter. There's no tightening sequence per se like there is with the, you know, the two pump halves and the two valve body halves, check them and all that. And it's up to you if you want to work up in 2 increments. You don't really have to. Just make sure you're absolutely flush, you know, mating surface to mating surface before you zip them down if you're going to use an impact. You won't hurt anything. Use a 3/8. Again, you just want to be careful. You don't want to get overzealous. And then I'll use a 1/2 inch drive torque wrench. And we'll go 53 foot-pounds. We can go right to torque. Or at least I do. Like I said, if you want to work up in increments, that's also fine. No big deal. Alright, I'm going to see if I can move this away from the tripod so I don't bang into it. You will have to use some leverage, put your weight if you're using a stand with wheels like this. If you're using, you know, a bench mounted fixture, then it won't be a big deal. Alright, just go around, check them. Make sure you didn't miss any. Okay. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to now turn the thing horizontally. We'll put the seals in for the low reverse and 2/6 clutch, and then we'll air check the whole case. Drop the control body assembly on, put the case connector in, then the filter, and then gasket and pan, and that'll be it. Alright, so before you go any further, just spin the input shaft And when you do that, just watch the output shaft. All right, transmission's effectively in neutral, so even if you've soaked your frictions, I mean, I don't, but these frictions were already kind of, you know, I didn't change them, so they were already soaked in with old transmission fluid, but that output shaft should not be moving when you turn your input shaft. There's like a 1-to-1 ratio between, you know, the turning of the input shaft and output shaft. Like, in other words, it's turning right with the input shaft, then you'll want to investigate, figure out why that is. The first thing you want to do is, you know, grab the output shaft and then spin the input shaft to see if there truly is, you know, a bind up or something that's causing this to spin. If there is, then, you know, just go back inside the case, figure out what it is, and fix it. But if you do everything right, when it comes to dropping everything into the case, everything is, you know, fully meshed and or splined onto wherever it needs to go, you won't have any issues. All right. Again, these seals will come in your overhaul kit, your paper and rubber kit. So you obviously would never have to reuse the old ones. So one thing I'll mention before we go any further, again, one of those deals where I didn't mention it previous, but the parking rod assembly here, the rod, the spring, and the little bullet that actually maneuvers and holds the parking pole against the lugs and the parking gear on your output shaft, that bullet will wear and fail, specifically the rivet on the end of it. So if you're working on a 6L80E model year 2017 or older, you'll want to replace this parking rod assembly. All right, it's 30 bucks. I'll flash the part number on the screen. You know, AC, Delco, GM, you can buy it at the dealership or online or wherever. Just make sure you're buying a genuine GM product. But ATRA and I think a couple other manuals will tell you to closely inspect the parking rod if you're working on a pre-2018 unit. And if the rivet on the end is, you know, looking mushroomed or shows wear, you want to replace it, but otherwise put it back in. I would not follow that advice. You don't need to spend any time inspecting it. Just throw it in the trash and purchase a new one. In 2018, they finally got the hardness correct on that rivet. Prior to that, that you know, was failing because it was too brittle or not hardened enough, so that after, you know, repeated, you know, engagements and disengagements into park, it would eventually mushroom, wear out, and fail, and you wouldn't be able to put the vehicle into park. So obviously, you want to avoid that scenario at all costs. All right, so now what we're going to do is air check the case just to validate that everything is good, and, you know, we're still getting the same kind of apply like we did when we were bench checking it. You know, with the pump and the 456 and you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 5R, and then we'll also check the low reverse and the 2.6. So we'll do the low reverse and the 2.6, and then we'll test the 1, 2, 3, 4, the 3.5R, and the 4.56. And the little bit of air you're hearing is this nozzle. I mean, this is kind of hard plastic, it's not rubber, so it's not creating a perfect seal. Okay, so I'm happy with the way that sounded for each of these clutch packs. So you could just kind of use your finger or a pick just to double check, make sure that the pack is free. In other words, it's not bound up. So again, 50 thousandths clearance for each of these, non-selective, so, you know, clearance is what it is. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 3.5 in reverse. And this is your 3.5 reverse. This is your 1, 2, 3, 4. And we'll check the 4.56. Okay, that's a very nice seal, even with this kind of crappy plastic little nozzle tip here. And that's what you want to hear. You don't want to hear any kind of hissing coming out of that clutch. All right, everything should rotate nice and free when you turn either the input shaft or the output shaft. All right, so we talked about the parking rod deal. Went over pump installation, did air checks, so now we're ready to bolt the whole, what I'll call, control body complex, valve body, TECM, IMS, speed sensors, and harness onto the case using the 6 starfish bolts. So first thing you want to do is put your new seals onto your valve body, onto the upper valve body. All right, again, this is a demo, so we're going to reuse the old ones. And get your rooster comb and the little engagement stud lined up with the manual valve. And then just carefully seat the valve body assembly onto the case. Okay, so these are basically Torx plus 50 inverted. Snap-on sockets 10 EPL. Incidentally, you have one and a couple of nuts. You could use a 4L60E bell housing to case bolt as an improvised socket and wrench. So, you know, if you don't have that snap-on socket or equivalent, but you do have one of those case bolts along with a couple of nuts that thread onto them, you can use that with whatever size socket goes with those nuts to install or remove and to torque to spec these bolts. And I want to say these bolts changed. In other words, GM changed the bolts from a traditional hex bolt to these starfish bolts. I want to say sometime in 2007, but I'll annotate the video to be sure, because I'm not 100% sure as I'm, you know, sitting here doing this. So 71 inch-pounds on these bolts, no particular tightening sequence. I generally will work inwards, kind of finish up this side, and I'll do these two last. And again, that's my way of doing it. You could just as easily do, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that'll be fine too. Okay, make sure this lever is all the way up. So that you can install your pass-through case connector. So you'll have a lip seal here and 2 O-rings here. And they, of course, come in the kit. And then you want to make sure you line up this little tab here, the engagement tab that you see, with the case connector on the TECM. Now, believe it or not, they make a special tool to actually install this thing, which you do not need, obviously. Okay. So go ahead and we'll apply our 71 inch-pounds. to be your detent roller. $8mm. This also gets 71 inch-pounds, but I just take my ratchet and I cinch it up. I think I tighten it a little bit tighter than the 71 inch-pounds that the book calls for, but I mean, I've been doing that way for, you know, since I've started building these, never had an issue with them coming loose. All right, next is going to be our filter. Now, if you have any kind of weird issues shifting, and you know, maybe you throw an intermittent solenoid code, P0751 is probably the most common. You know, from like an intermittent fault perspective. Check the filter here along the neck, the upper neck. It likes to crack. The other thing I'll mention with P0751 is that, you know, a lot of times you get a false positive for that solenoid. It's a solenoid performance code, and a lot of times it has nothing to do with the solenoid. It's really the, you know, the control body, either the clutch select valves, the springs they like to wear out. It could be this filter. You know, it could be any one of the clutch boost or clutch regulator valves, but point being is that a lot of times you will cure that when you take this down, overhaul, and install like a valve body kit. So Sonics or Transgo, it really doesn't matter. Whichever one you prefer. I prefer Sonics, but Transgo is also fine too. You can buy the whole Transgo reprogramming kit. That'll come with the clutch select valves, or you can buy the basic shift kit, buy the clutch select valve kit separately, and the you know, the kit for the pump, you know, the PR valve and such separately. In Sonic, same deal. I mean, a lot of their stuff you can buy individually as you need it, but with these, I would just spend the money, buy the entire kit and caboodle, because most of these valves, especially in the earlier units, you know, most of the bores are worn, and that kit, you know, should fix it 90% of the time, 95% of the time. If you still having issues, and obviously you're going to either ream the bores where there's you know, reamers for them and oversized valves, or you're just going to have to straight up buy a whole new valve body assembly and complex from GM. All right, I want to make mention of one other thing before I put the pan on. But to do that, I need to move the camera. All right, so in keeping with replacing TECMs and valve body assemblies, you see this number right here? This is your OS number, operating system number, that came with your vehicle and that is used to control the transmission. So there are, I want to say, 15 or 20 different you know, serializations here. You know, in other words, 15 to 20 different numbers. If you're going to replace your TECM, you want to make sure you replace it with one with this same code. If you don't, then you're gonna have the wrong operating system installed, and no matter what you do in terms of fast adapt and, you know, trying to get the thing to work with the transmission and operate it correctly or control it correctly, it's never gonna happen. You have all kind of drivability issues, symptoms, late harsh shifting, missing gears, it might go into limp mode. I mean, who the hell knows? But the bottom line is that if you don't have a TECM with the same operating software that your vehicle came with, then you will need to either reprogram the ECM itself so that it'll talk to the new TECM, or you just need to get the correct TECM with the correct software so that, you know, the two will talk to each other and you'll be good to go. And that's basically it. All right, pan time. And just put your magnet, and then these pan gaskets are reusable. So you'll have an alignment dowel here, and then you'll have an alignment dowel on the other side. Hey, let me zoom out a little bit here. The camera angle is not good. you just want to make sure you get your little alignment studs or dowels into their location on the case, and then just put the pan on. Trying to think if there's anything else I should mention. We talked about most of the different things that you need to do, you know, different parts that need to be replaced or substituted for, you know, corrective parts when you go to overhaul one of these things for real. I think I'll probably do a separate video where I'll literally walk through all of the differences and changes that the 6L80E underwent during the course of its lifespan when I have the time. I'll probably take this back apart because it's a really good, now cleaned up example of an early model unit. And then I have a couple other cores that are late model units. I think one of them's like a 2014 or 2015 that has, you know, an overwhelming majority of all the updates GM made to this thing. To correct pattern failures and address, you know, driver complaints and all that stuff. So I'll try to do that sometime soon relative to when I'm going to publish, you know, this video series, you know, the demo rebuild and demo valve body assembly and all that, so that it kind of is a fast follower. I can't commit to anything, obviously. I mean, you know, it just depends on what I have going on in the shop and current workload and priorities, but I think it would be a good video for folks just to have that context, so that when you go and, you know, especially if you're not overhauling this thing yourself, which most of you, I don't want to say most of you, but I mean, there's going to be a sizable fraction of you that are watching this that are not going to do that for a variety of different reasons, but at least you'll have the context. At least you'll have, you know, the information that you need to have a, you know, productive, intelligent conversation with your transmission builder, and you know what to ask for, you know what the problems are, and you can confirm up front that those things are going to be done. You know, all those corrective actions that the the transmission builder has to take. Now, if you're going to order a reman unit, you know, if you're ordering one from GM or one of the, you know, third-party suppliers, then you'll want to just check to see what updating has been done. If it's a GM unit, an overwhelming majority, if not all, the updating has been done, to my knowledge. If it's like Jasper, they're one of the biggest aftermarket suppliers of transmissions, or a Monster, then you can call and check in with them to see, you know, what specific updates that they include in their units. You know, especially if you have an early 4L80 or 4L80, 6L80, like a 2007 to 2010 vintage, you want to make sure that they replace that 1, 2, 3, 4 piston with like a Sonex piston. If they use the updated GM piston, which I mean, I guess you can do, but I would prefer the Sonex. Sonex is a billet aluminum piston, and I've never heard of one actually cracking. Of course, I got one bolt here. I gotta slide past the camera to get to it. Never heard of them cracking. The GM, their second design piston is a lot more reliable than the first design, but it's still, I've heard of it being an issue. I haven't done enough of these to see one cracked myself, but I don't take chances. I install Sonex piston regardless of what year the unit is. Alright, these take 71 inch-pounds. I'm only going to torque a few of them because, like I said, this is not going into a vehicle. I'm probably going to take it back apart again to do that comparative analysis video of the changes that I just talked about. So, anyway, the 6L80E, at least in my opinion, is not a difficult transmission to work on. It's fairly straightforward. You know, you saw for yourself, there's not a whole lot to it in terms of like complexity or, you know, nothing that's real tedious or real high risk from purely a procedural standpoint. If you follow the process and the, you know, what the procedure calls for, then, you know, again, chances are, and you'll be perfectly fine unless you're a gorilla with it or something. But the main few barriers to those trying to get into one of these units, and I guess transmissions in general, but specifically the later model 6Ls, 8Ls, and 10Ls, is a couple of things. One, which I'll call TNT, so it's really two barriers in one. And then the second one is just going to be understanding the unit. So TNT stands for tooling and time. To competently work on one of these transmissions, you are going to need to spend about $1,000 or more in tooling. This fixture, even if you work on 4L60, 700R4s, or TH350s, whatever, the area, the case here, the body where this engages, is wider by about, I want to say, 1.5 inches, 2 inches, relative to how wide one of those other fixtures will open. So you need something that's going to be a little bit wider, and you also ideally want something that's going to be very stout. These are kind of, I don't want to say they're huge transmissions, but they're big, and they do weigh a lot. And so you want to make sure that you have a fixture that can accommodate them, and that by itself is going to run you in the neighborhood of $300. GM makes one, the Kent Moore. I'm putting this damn thing on backwards. Yes, I am. You know, the Kent Moore unit, and normally there is a gasket here. Obviously, we're not putting a gasket on. I'm not even paying attention to what I'm doing. So forgive me, but yeah. But yeah, you want a fixture that will accommodate the body of these 6L80s and 90s. So the large snap ring pliers, or gigantic snap ring pliers for the center sport snap ring, you know, you're going to be into those for at least a couple $100 for a good pair. Now, there's the dealership tool. I'll have to flash the J number onto the screen. I don't know what it is off the top of my head, but that's available. I want to say that the price for that is fairly high, you know, in the couple $100 range. The one I bought was also a couple $100, but it's sturdy. I mean, like, I have no problems whatsoever handling that snap ring, getting it back into position. You know, it makes it like, you know, really like child's play, to be honest. So you want to get a really good pair. I mean, I've seen some lesser expensive ones, but you know, on places like eBay and Amazon. But in my, just looking at the pictures, in my opinion, they weren't stout enough. Like, I want something that will handle that snap ring without any problem whatsoever, and make it as easy as you saw, you know, when we were installing it into the case. And then the other tooling, you know, again, figure to spend on average between $100 and $200 per piece of tooling. You can improvise, like I showed you in part 1 with the, you know, with that Belleville plate return spring thing in the 2.6 clutch. You could just use the ring gear, output shaft assembly. You can install the 3.5R drum back into the case without the, you know, that band, you know, vice grip style tool. But again, it's going to take you a lot longer, and you're going to be spending more time on it. So if you're only doing one of these, 2 of these, you know, you could probably get away with not having stuff like that. But if you're going to do these frequently, you know, you want to be efficient too, and that tool will pay for itself the more the more units you build. So, and then the third barrier is just knowing the transmission. In other words, what usually goes wrong with them. And if something did go wrong, if symptoms appeared, based on the description of the symptoms, you know, what is the likely cause or causes? And that especially becomes important if you start doing them, you know, doing 1, 2, 3 units, your first few out the door, and there's a problem with one, and, well, you're like, well, I don't know. I mean, is it tuning? Is it a mechanical problem? Did I, you know, screw something up with the valve body? You know, those are the kind of things that, you know, can really jam you up if you really aren't intimately familiar with the inner workings of these things, how they work, what their common issues and failures are, and what you need to go correct on overhaul. And that all takes time to learn, and sometimes you learn stuff the hard way. And I mean, I've learned my share of lessons that way, but you know, eventually you'll get it, and you know, you'll be fine. And of course, the reward is that you'll be doing a great many of these, presumably for, you know, a decent profit based on the investment that you've made in tooling, in time, and in knowledge. So knowledge gathering. Anyway, didn't mean to go too off on a tangent. You know, it's either I talk about it, you know, something to do with this transmission, or you know, share some tidbit about the industry or whatever, or I work in silence and all you hear is, you know, bolts going in and, you know, maybe a torque wrench. But anyway, that's the 6L80. Again, a fairly easy unit to work on, in my opinion. I don't think that anyone should like be, you know, be afraid of getting into these transmissions. You just have to be prepared, you know, with the requisite knowledge that you're going to need to overhaul them correctly, especially if you had not done it before. And then of course, all your tooling, you know, you want to make sure that you have the correct tooling that will put you in a position to succeed. Anyway, that's the video series. We're going to be doing a lot more on the 6L family of transmissions. I'm going to be looking to film a high performance build where, you know, we'll actually go through the whole thing soup to nuts, install all of the corrective updates and some performance parts, so you kind of get a glimpse into, you know, what that's like, and you know, maybe even grab some ideas for your own build. So, and like I mentioned, the comparative kind of early versus late video, I'll look to see if I can get to that sometime in the next couple months or so, you know, meaning from the time this is published. Hopefully I'll have that video out within that, you know, that time frame. So anyway, as always, thank you so much for your views, your likes, your shares, you know, your feedback and comments, and most importantly, your time. So I know time's valuable, and I really appreciate you spending some of yours on my channel with me. Until the next time we meet, thank you again, and have a great rest of your day or evening.